Welcome to Basic Brewing Radio for Thursday, October 8th, 2009. I'm James Spencer. Here at Basic Brewing Radio, we're all about home brewing. Well, this week, the mad fermentationist Michael Tonsmeire joins us along with fellow home brewer Nathan Zeender as they share their adventures and misadventures in Solera Brewing and aging in barrels. Well, if you're new to home brewing and would like to get into the hobby for the first time, check out our website, basicbrewing.com, where you can find archives of our audio and video podcasts and our DVDs to walk you through basic and more advanced brewing techniques. You can find me on Twitter, my username, Basic Brewing, all one word. Also, you can find me on Facebook at facebook.com/basicbrewing.james. We also have a Basic Brewing Radio and Basic Brewing Video page on Facebook, which is at facebook.com/basicbrewing. And if you become a fan of the show there, you can get a notice when new shows are posted or new posts are showed. Thanks again. Thanks again, everybody, clicking on the Amazon.com associate link on our basicbrewing.com site. Whenever you think of Amazon, think of us and click on our associate link first. It won't cost you any extra, and you'll be helping us bring you the show, and we appreciate your support there. There are also associate links for Brew Your Own magazine and the American Homebrewers Association on the site, too. Thanks again to everybody who's participated in the Brew Your Own magazine Basic Brewing Radio Collaborative Experiment. We have your data, and now we're trying to schedule a time to get together to taste our samples and to review the information, so stay tuned for that. Very interesting stuff, and I'm looking forward to getting it out there to you. I've gotten a bunch of emails after our latest episode of Basic Brewing Video, where Steve Wilkes showed off the results of his chili beer experiment. That's where Steve divided a basic pale ale into 5 one-gallon jugs and steeped a different chili pepper into each jug. And that was a fun show to record, obviously, because of the different flavors that each pepper contributed to the beer. And you would think that it would be all about the heat, but it's not all about the heat. It's about the flavor that the peppers gave. And there's some heat with some of the peppers. But if you haven't seen that, check that out. It's a really interesting show. But the questions that I've been getting have been about scaling up the recipe from 1-gallon batches to 5-gallon batches, and about pepper preparation, mostly. As far as preparation goes, Steve just took the seeds out of the bigger peppers, only leaving the seeds in these small, we call them Pequin peppers, but I think I looked online after the show, and I think it may be Pekin, if I remember my high school Spanish classes in college. So the seeds were only left in the Pekin peppers, which may account for the heat that we were getting from that. But that's it. Just take the seeds out of the bigger peppers, and that's all the preparation that he did. And as far as scaling up, I think that we would scale up the number of peppers with the volume of beer. It seems that the pepper flavor would be diluted if you didn't. But Steve's going to brew up a full batch of the pepper beer and use a mixture of the peppers that we talked about on the show, scaled up for testing and tasting purposes. So we hope to do a show on that before too long. Maybe a show with Steve cooking a dish to go along with the beer. We haven't had Steve cooking on the show in a while, and I miss it. He's an awesome cook. I'm going to use the mailbag this week for a little rant. I was inspired this morning by a note from Chuck in Lansdale, Pennsylvania. So, bear with me as I go off a little bit. Chuck says, I am very new to homebrew. I got away from the big three a few years back, and I'm strictly a craft brew, microbrew drinker now. Yay, Chuck. Chuck says, what I like and what my friends like are two different things. My friends prefer light in color and flavor Mega Swill from Bud Mill Coors. I prefer beers from the darker end of the spectrum, both lager and ale. Could you recommend about a dozen styles that would run the gambit from the stuff my friends prefer to what I prefer? I'm trying to convince them that dark beer does not mean heavy beer, but also want to show them just how flavorless their beer is. Well, Chuck, and here's where I go into the rant mode here, stepping up onto the soapbox here. I say brew and buy the beer that you like. Experiment with a wide variety of styles, but stick to what you want to drink. Then, as you go on your journey of wonderful beer flavors, offer your friends a sip every now and then, and if they like that sip, then show them where the beer fridge is and tell them that they're welcome to have some more. Now, I'm saying this because I've made the mistake over the past several years of handing beer newbies a full pint of either wonderful homebrew that I've spent a lot of time crafting or a commercial beer that's cost me a lot of money, only to find a half-full glass of that wonderful beer abandoned on the counter or in a corner behind a plant or something, and my friend standing there holding a can of Miller or Bud Light or whatever they're used to drinking. That's a waste of good beer. You haven't converted anybody, and you've made them feel pressured into liking what you like. Now, I know that there are beer evangelists who say they won't let crappy beer into their house, but I think that they're risking turning off potential good beer fans by going over the top and coming on too strong. But for me, the straw that broke the camel's back was this past holiday season, and I might have talked about this on the show, when I served family members both New Glarus Wisconsin Belgian Red and Raspberry Tart, only to have them turn up their noses and waste some beer, some world-class beer that people would love to have. Now, that most of the beer didn't go to waste because, I consumed it myself, frankly, but I would have much rather shared it with friends who would have appreciated the beer much more. It's a multiplying experience when you have good beer that you like with friends that you like who like the same beer. It kind of magnifies the experience. So I guess the point of my rant is to recommend going easy on your swill-enjoying friends, Chuck. Let them have a sip at a time of the good stuff, but don't be too overbearing. And for heaven's sake, don't waste good beer on them or dumb down your tastes trying to convert them. If they come around as you did, then you can share the journey of good beer together. So what do you think about that? What is your method of converting your friends? Have you been able to successfully convert your bad beer drinking friends? Drop me a line at james@basicbrewing.com or just use the contact form on basicbrewing.com to join in the rant or to set me straight otherwise. It's been a while since the mad fermentationist Michael Tonsmeire has been on the program. I can't remember how our conversation got started about these topics, but Mike and Nathan Zeender and I got to talking over email about Nathan's experience playing with the Solera aging process, and then we started talking about Mike and Nathan's adventures and misadventures with barrel aging, and before you know it, a show topic was born. Well, Mike Tonsmeire and Nathan Zeender, welcome to Basic Brewing Radio.
Great to
Thanks
be
so
here,
much.
James.
It's good to hear your voice again, Mike.
It's been a while since I've been on.
Yeah. And Nathan, you are a newcomer.
Yeah, thanks for having me.
And introduce yourself to us. Who are you?
Sure. I am a home brewer here in D.C. I guess I've been doing it for about 5 years now. And, I met Mike maybe 3 years ago, something like that. And, I guess we both had this shared interest in sort of mixed fermentation, sour weirdness, and so we found ourselves entangled in a couple of projects together. And so I guess today we're going to talk about one of the projects was the Solera project that I started, I guess, about 3 years ago, and in which I had been wanting to do a sour beer. I guess I'd been thinking on it for a few months, and I had an uncarbonated 12% over oaked barley wine, as you know, every respecting home brewer should have in their basement at some point, right? Everybody's done that, right?
Oh yeah.
And then I had brewed. It was summertime, so I wanted something sort of tart and refreshing. So I brewed up a 5-gallon batch of it was a very basic recipe. I think I maybe had some wheat in there, and I wanted to do a tart cherry beer. So I went and got some sour cherry juice from the natural food store, and I brewed that batch up, and it was pretty good, and not quite what I was going for, but it had like this sort of nice tart cherry element to it. And so I thought, hey, I've got this oaky barley wine, right, and then I've got this tart cherry beer, and it just sort of was screaming Flanders red to me. So I, with 5 gallons of each, I decided that I was going to, figure out some portion to go into a 5-gallon glass fermenter for some time period, in which I would then, see how it evolved, and then pull out portions of it in the future. I believe my initial mix was, somewhere in the range of like, mostly 60 or 70% of the cherry beer, and then, the rest I topped off with this sort of very hearty, uncarbonated oaked barley wine, and I wanted to sort of somehow mimic this this Solera process of it's used in sherry and vinegar making. So I had soaked in preparation, I believe it was probably around an ounce of oak cubes, medium toast probably, and had soaked those in balsamic vinegar for a month or something prior to doing this blend. And so I sort of nestled those in the carboy, and then I poured in this mixture of beer. And I'm a big fan of sour beer in general, and I had a small cellar of those beers, so started cracking those open, and would throw the dregs into this 5-gallon glass fermenter, and after a while, it's sort of got a nice pellicle on the top, and all the different microbes, the Pediococcus and the Lactobacillus and the Brettanomyces, probably every strain after tossing all these different dregs in there, we're just sort of fighting it out in there. And I figured, to the strongest go the spoils, So that was sort of a large picture of what I was thinking.
I did some research on the internets, and looking in the Solera, what the official definition of the Solera process is.
Sure.
And as I understand it, it is a process where, and point me in the right direction if I stray, but say your Solera process, if you want it to be like 4 barrels or 4 stages, you start by having 4 different barrels of successive vintages, say year 1, year 2, year 3, year 4. Then what you do is you rack off half of, say, year 1, and then you rack half of what's in year 2 into year 1, and half of what's in year 3 into year 2 and 4. And so you essentially start this process where you're blending over time with these successions of barrels.
Exactly.
Is that anything like what the process really is?
Yeah, most homebrewers do sort of a very much simplified version of it. So sort of a standard homebrew process might be to start with just brand new beer and then every year replace, say, half of that with fresh beer. So that after the first year you just have year-old beer. After the second year you have half of that would be year-old beer, half of it would be 2-year-old beer. After the third year, a quarter of it would be year-old beer, a quarter of it would be 2-year-old beer, and a half of it would be 3-year-old beer.
Yeah, not everybody has the closet space or basement space to have multiple
4 or 5,
aging carboys, of beer around us to do the official version of it.
Exactly. And I'm sorry, go ahead, Mike.
No, go for it.
So how I sort of approached it was, so I had 5 gallons that I let sit for a year, adding just, all kinds of bugs to from different dregs, Belgian sours and a few American sours. Russian River is a particular favorite. So after a year, I started, I would pull samples after maybe 6 months just to see in what direction it was going, and it was getting nice and nice and tart, and was pulling some wood character from the oak cubes, and after about a year, I decided, hey, let me pull out 3 gallons of it. I still had some of the cherry beer and some of the barley wine and reserves because I had 5 gallons of each of those going into the project. So then when I pulled off the 3 gallons and bottled those, I went in heavier with the barley wine the second time just to add a little bit more depth. And also at that point threw in, I would guess half a pound of dried cherries, and then I put that to bed for another year. And at that point, I already had a bunch of other sour beers going in the basement, and so I decided I was gonna bottle the whole 5 gallons. I was expecting to, at least there to be some remains of these dried cherries that I had put in there, and they had just completely been subsumed into the liquid. There was no pieces of dried cherry in there. It was pretty great. So I had sort of 2 vintages, one at a year-ish, and, another one at, maybe 2.5 years, something like that, maybe 3 years. I'm sort of much more of an intuitive brewer than Mike. I don't keep, especially early on, I wasn't keeping a whole lot of records. I was just sort of seeing, where things would take me. So it was sort of, I got 2 bottlings out of it, and it just made it a very super complex, extremely sort of tart, and there's a good bit of tannin in the beer. Had this gorgeous sort of red color from the barley wine had been a relatively dark beer, and just like super sort of and I guess in the sort of Flanders red category. It was a really great experiment. I was really happy with how it turned out.
So not unlike when gangsters put bodies in barrels of acid, the cherries just kind of disappeared.
They just sort of weren't there after a year or so.
Now it was
a nice surprise.
It would seem to me that when you're cooking and say you're making a soup, if you keep adding things, a little bit of this, a little bit of that, a little bit of this, it can go very, very right until all of a sudden, if you put a little bit too much of the next ingredient, you got something that's not worth eating, right?
Oh, absolutely, yeah. There's a lot of caprice in these long-aged sour beers. You hope and you pray, and that they'll turn out turn out well, And I was a little concerned after, the more generations sometimes you take these beers by adding. I wasn't adding fresh wort to them. I wasn't, I guess, that concerned about them, getting too out of control. I was adding, attenuated beers to feed it, so there wasn't a ton of available sugar. They had to really sort of work for their sugars, and I guess it sort of came to a happy medium. And the beers turned out really well. Had just a nice, sharp, defined sourness to them. Nothing, too overwhelming or bracing. But I guess that would be a concern.
I think we should point out that sort of the standard Solera process, you'd be just replacing the beer you remove with the exact same recipe.
Right.
So, if you were doing this on a larger scale, say in a full barrel, every year or whatever, you'd be taking out 10 gallons of whatever the base beer was and replacing it with the exact same thing. Mm-hmm. So in that case, you hopefully wouldn't get that sort of muddled, too many spices in the pot sort of flavor, because you'd just be adding the same spices, just replacing what you had taken out.
Right. And are there any rules that you guys can recommend? I mean, I guess the point that I was making was, it seems to me that if you added too much of different things or too much, just too much, it seems like you would get kind of a muddied. Like
very well could. Like I only use these two base beers that seem to marry well because in the Flanders tradition, the Flanders Red tradition, you are blending different ages of beers, and a lot of times,
and even different gravities.
Yeah, and exactly, and you could be adding cherries, to that base beer. So it sort of had a lot of the elements. It sort of was the barley wine was sort of a vinous beer in itself. It was very oaky and tannic, and then there was this Sprite young sort of cherry beer. So it sort of made sense. I guess going back to the sort of intuition, I intuited that these flavors, could work out. So I guess if you're willy-nilly, just sort of pouring, random stuff in there, and I guess maybe if you were pouring sort of, subpar beers that you just sort of like, oh, this didn't turn out very good, so let me just throw it in here, you might be playing with fire a little bit.
Mm-hmm. Well, except
mindful, I think, is what I'm getting at.
And in your case, like the barley wine was too oaky, and so that's sort of something easy to dilute out with another beer. It wasn't like a yeast flaw or a problem.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah.
I guess what you could do, just to be safe, is pull a sample of what's in the carboy and mix a small amount of the beer that you're thinking of putting in there, and do sort of a test blend in a small container before you commit yourself to doing something bigger.
But that's part of the risk sort of inherent in this process is that, even once you mix them together and give them another year for the bugs to work and for fermentation to happen, it's going to end up different. Whereas, say you blend, what most professional brewers do is have two already fermented out beers that they're blending together and already soured beers. And so there's a lot more control there because you're saying, I have this and it's already sat for 3 years, I have this that's already sat for 2 years, not I have this that's sat for 1 and this that's sat for 2, and then they're going to sit together for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so
you won't have the same evolution.
Exactly. And so, I think in a lot of ways there are a lot of advantages on the homebrew scale, not having to maintain, as you were saying earlier, 4 or 5 different sort of aged barrels of things and then having to taste them all and decide on the proper blend. And it gives you a bit of simplicity, but also a bit of sort of locked in because your blend is going and there's only so much you can do to change it.
Now, could you do this same technique with non-sour, non-buggy beers? Does it make sense to do something like that?
There's a lot of risk, and this is, and we can talk about the barrels that Nathan and I have going. But one of the risks with doing a non-sour beer is if any one of the batches that you put in, and say you're doing a batch a year or a batch every 6 months, if any one of them goes bad, you may lose the whole project.
Mm.
And that may not be that bad of a risk if you're only talking about 5 gallons of beer. But say you're talking an entire barrel, well, that's up to you and how confident you are with your sanitation practices and how willing you are to dump, a large volume of beer down your drain.
Yeah, and I've definitely heard of people doing sort of barley wines in this fashion, where you would pull off just fragments every year and have your sort of your vintage beer every year and just replace that, and you'd always have like this sort of deep aged out quality to your beer.
Now, do you have to think about anything like putting a layer of CO2 on top of the beer to eliminate the problems with headspace, or do you not care about that, especially with sour beers?
Yeah, I guess if we talk about like the sort of the where you're going to be storing and fermenting out your beer, sort of the vehicle of fermentation will have a lot to do with it. If you're doing it in a barrel, in a porous barrel, you could lose a good bit to evaporation, so you'd want to be topping off on a regular basis. If you're doing it in a carboy at home, I think it could be a lot easier to monitor, and you won't be evaporating at the same rate.
The angels share, as they say.
Exactly. Yeah.
So, Mike, you broached the subject. Talk about your adventures in wood.
So I think this was about this time last year. A group of us thought, hey, we love sour beers. Nathan's got a free basement. Why don't we buy a wine barrel from a local winery and throw some Flanders Red in there? And so, of course, getting 8 homebrewers to agree on anything is pretty tough, let alone, a recipe and a style of beer and all that. But we were lucky to have a group of people, and we agreed on a pretty simplistic recipe. And we contacted a couple local wineries, and one of the first ones, Chrysalis Winery in Virginia. Very nice. They were happy to sell us a barrel and happy to clean it out and hydrate it and check for leaks right before we picked it up. And our technique was, it was a 60-gallon barrel, and we brewed 60 gallons of beer. We had 10 gallons that had been souring for about 6 months, so that was sort of the starter culture. And then we had 45 gallons that had been fermented out with either a neutral ale yeast or a Belgian strain, whatever people had on hand. And then we had 5 gallons of fresh wort that we added just to give sugar to get the Brett and the PDO off the ground.
And the 10 gallons of sour had both been done with rose layer blend.
No, actually the
Is that right?
half was rose layer. The half I did was built up from the dregs of a bottle of red poppy. From
the red poppy, right.
Yeah. And that was a killer, and that took one of your beers down to like 001 in a week or something.
I got it with that starter, and it tore through. With this, it was a 9% sour red beer. It went to town. It was great stuff.
Yeah.
But, sorry. Yeah, go ahead. Continue, please.
Yeah. So we blend this all together, and after I think after a couple of weeks, it needed another 5 gallons of beer. Either I'm not sure if people underestimated how much their loss would be. If everyone loses half a gallon and you're given 4.5, you end up 5 gallons short. Or we topped off, and after 6 months, we had our first sick beer. It was just super ropey, viscous, snotty consistency that after having brewed 15 or 20 sour beers, I'd never had.
Yeah, we were dancing in a happy circle, I think, when we had our first, the sick beer together, and we were all in it together, and it was this wonderful thing.
It's pretty gross at the moment, actually, but I mean, the beer is after another couple of months, it's no longer viscous, super sour. Yeah.
Yeah, I did a brief interview with Vinny Gelurzo about his having a sick beer at one point, and it got better.
Yeah. Speaking of Vinny, we just had a growler of Sanctification that was a little on the sick side, and I don't know.
A little ropey. But yeah, I mean, that's a natural, very natural progression for one of these long-aged sour beers. It will go through this stage, and it's doing important work. It's just very ugly work.
Yeah, for those, I get questions from newbies out there who, have just discovered the show, and they say, you talk about these things and you assume everybody knows what you're talking about. So what are you talking about when you say a sick beer or a ropey beer?
So what happens when it's certain strains of PDO, which is a lactic acid bacteria, under certain conditions it'll make this syrupy, viscous net. And over time, the Brettanomyces, the wild yeast, will break down through this. And it's normally a sign that the beer is going to be very sour. Already I think the beer is probably the sourest sour beer that I've been a part of, and it's considerably younger than some of the other ones I have aging, and we didn't feed it any fruit, and it was all fermented out pretty much in primary.
Yeah, it's really brilliant.
Yeah.
I was going to say, that's saying something.
And
I've had
so
some of your sour beers.
This is really where Solera would come in, because let's say you didn't have a group of 8 or 9 friends who could all brew 5 or 10 gallons, and that you could trust them to do a decent job. This would be something that, after the initial time and effort to brew 60 gallons of beer on your own, say you had a 10-gallon system, it would be 6 batches. Every year you could just take off 10 gallons, or 5 gallons for that matter, and brew one more batch and top it off. And the way the math works out, if you replace half of it every year, the beer will average 1 year old. If you take a third of the beer out, it'll average 2 years old. If you take a quarter out, it'll average 3 years old. And 3 years old is a pretty sort of classic age for both Lambics and Flanders Reds to be aged. And that would work out in a 60-gallon barrel just to 5 gallons every 4 months, or 15 gallons once a year, or however you want to work it out. And that's a pretty manageable amount once it gets rolling. And you would just have this constant 3-year-old blended sour beer, or a big barley wine, or whatever you are willing to risk. Speaking of that risk, I think Nathan can talk about what happened to the wee heavy we put into a bourbon barrel, maybe 3 or 4 months after we got the Flanders Red going. Sure,
we're riding on a high of this really elegant Flanders Red acid beer in my basement. And so the next idea is, we need another barrel. We need an American bourbon barrel, So through a friend, Tim Polhouse, who was a brewer at Old Dominion out in Virginia at the time, we were able to procure a bourbon barrel, a fresh bourbon barrel from Bowman, who do
the classiest bourbon.
Yeah, the classiest bourbon around. Virginia Gentleman, is it? Or
yeah,
that's.
Which I believe, comes in a plastic jug, and
So keep it local, right? Keep it local.
Yeah, I think any product that you have to put the word gentleman on it.
But it is. I think it's the only bourbon that is not brewed in Kentucky. They got some sort of grandfathered in sort of clause that they can call it bourbon even though it's not from Bourbon County.
I'll be darned.
So, this fresh barrel, it's from the get-go, it just smelled awesome. Had this great caramelly
vanilla,
just really, really, great essence to it. So we decided we'd cook up a larger recipe, sort of to deal with this sort of much more aggressive barrel. It's American oak.
And we want some insurance with the alcohol, because again, you've got a barrel that probably is clean, but then you've got 8 people, and you've got, we all brew, clean beers, but when you're exposing a beer to oxygen, that helps microbes. When you're, letting it sit around at cellar temperatures for, 4 or 5 months, that helps them. And so we were aiming for something that at least had some insurance that it wouldn't go funky.
Mm-hmm.
And so we had procured this barrel, and we thought up this recipe for a strong wee heavy, and we got it all brewed, got everybody together, filled the barrel, and we nestled it right next to the Flanders Red in my basement, aka Little Peyote Land, where I had another. I guess at that point I probably had 20 other gallons of different sour beers going all in the same area.
And it was my brilliant idea that the barrels were on this one barrel rack, and they actually touched. And so I decided I would put a piece of aluminum foil right at sort of the nub where they touched. And I was hoping that would be enough to sort of deflect the sour, the PDO and the Brett from, evaporating, or crawling out and hopping over.
So we were thinking, 3-4 months on this fresh bourbon. bourbon barrel, and I guess maybe about 3 or 4 months in, I was pulling regular samples, and I remember I had Mike had me around one evening, and I pulled out a little sample in a mason jar, brought it over to his house, and we got into it, and there was sort of a faint banana character to it, a fruitiness to it, and
up until then it had been sort of very classic, vanilla notes, bourbon, malty. Everyone used either American ale yeast or Scottish yeast or something. Very clean yeast that really shouldn't give any estery anything.
So a little off that, maybe a few weeks after that, we started making plans for racking out, right, which is going to be a real task. We got it's 53 gallons in this bourbon barrel, so it's going to be a long day of bottling in my basement. I'm sorry, Mike, what was that?
Oh, I was going to say, when we started brewing the replacement batch, we were going to brew a Doppelstück, a giant alt with some smoked malt to put in. I had been lobbying. I was a little concerned. I was lobbying just to go straight to a big sour beer or something, but people wanted one more clean one before the barrel went permanently sour. So.
So this is everyone's making plans. They brewed this next this Doppelstück, and I go down and I'm like, let me pull a sample, see where we're at on this beer. And there was first I noticed a pellicle on the top of the beer when I peered in, and then it had taken on a wonderful sourness, sort of something comparable to like a Gale's Prize Old Ale. It was, and I can't lie, I was smiling when I tasted it.
We were all concerned that Nathan would be down there dumping dregs into this thing,
which I did not do. But the devil was in the barrel, and so we regrouped because our sort of we heavy was all of a sudden it was an Oud Brewing. We had a huge Oud Brewing cooking, and it's been going for a few months now, souring up nicely, and I think it's going to be just a world-class beer. But now we've got a little more time to sort of think out where we're going next with this bourbon barrel after we pull out this 11 or 12% huge Oud Brewing out of it.
Yeah, I mean, to give you an idea, this beer started about 1/100. So I mean, there's only so much higher than even a regular ale yeast can go to protect from sourness. Really, if you want to be sure that you're brewing a beer in a barrel, a clean beer that's going to stay clean, you're probably going to have to do a 13 or a 14% imperial stout or something like that.
And not in my basement.
Yeah.
Next to the Flanders Red.
Yeah.
So lesson learned.
And so since then we've started dumping in dregs to it, just assuming that we want, the critters that we want in there and not whatever may or may not have been picked up from the barrel or, someone's just rogue infection.
Though, these barrels are, they're porous, they're wooden oak barrels, so there was probably a transfer over from the Flanders Red. A lot of these, the wild yeast are airborne too. So, yeah, I'm sure it's sort of just picked up, hopefully this sort of house strain out of my basement, which has treated the Flanders pretty well.
Plus the fact that you used the same wine thief to sample both barrels on the same time, right? That was
almost certainly.
Yeah, I guess these sort of sanitizer only does so much. Now we're making plans. We're getting ready to pull out the Flanders Red. And Mike, you want to talk about what?
So once again, we've had some people move out of town, so we've recruited new people, and there's always sort of we now have an email distribution list that I think recently has been getting about 30 emails a day of what we should brew, when we should all get together, because now we all have to get together with the new beer and bottle the old beer or keg the old beer. So on the next one, we're thinking of doing something pretty light and small, something along the lines of a Belgian single. some pills, some wheat, 20 IBUs of hops. Nothing too aggressive, just something that will really show off the character of the barrel and the bugs.
Well, this, again, I'm just always amazed at, especially what you do, Mike, with all the interesting critters that you play with. And I'll be fascinated to watch, the progress of this project. Yeah. But you've got, in addition to the brewing stuff that you've got, you've also branched out. You've got the Mad Fermentationist blog, but you and Nathan have struck out on another venture in that vein.
Yeah, no. Nathan started up a blog. Maybe 6 months ago, Nathan?
Yeah, that's about right.
And so after starting up his homebrewing blog, pretty much all my friends, after getting to be on Basic Brewing Radio, were so jealous of me that they all started up blogs. But Nathan, I'm not sure if he was trying to mooch off my my big ticket Mad Fermentationist links or whatever. Proposed that we start interviewing really sort of super interesting small craft brewers, people that maybe around the country. People wouldn't have heard of, not sort of the big names or, the Stones and the Dogfish Heads, which brew interesting beers, but, who hasn't heard, Sam Galagione's story about, starting brewing, with a Sabco system in, the back of the restaurant or,
right.
These little places, like Willimantic in Connecticut and Pretty Things in Massachusetts, and we're hoping to talk to people, like Scott at East End in Pittsburgh, and, we're sort of branching out on sort of the general East Coast.
And the idea is that, we'll contact these very interesting and beer-obsessed brewers, and we'll spend the day brewing with them, and then, interview them, and we'll create a recipe, and we'll just put it out there to share. And just the idea is we're just hoping to meet some really interesting and great people, and just, put it out there for everybody to enjoy.
And let's face it, the promise of free beer from these interesting brewers has to enter into the equation as well.
Certainly. No, and more than the free beer, the ability to be able to ask any question you want, and and the ability to have them pull samples from the barrels in the back that even if you showed up with money that you wouldn't be getting to try.
Yeah, there's definitely a microphone or a camera or even an ink pen will get you into places that a fat wallet won't sometimes. So,
just the collegiality and the camaraderie with these guys so far that we've dealt with is just amazing. It's just they're so just open and happy and excited about what they do, and just so willing to share.
It really to me feels like going to hang out with a home brewer with a big system. They want to impress, and they're always really passionate, and they all have sort of the things that they want people to know and the things they want to tell home brewers, and most of these guys were home brewers, and so there's sort of that sort of link there.
So what's the URL? Where can people find this?
It's brewlocal.blogspot.com. And right now we're in the middle of posting stuff from Dan Paquette of Pretty Things, or have we moved on to Dave from Willimantic?
Next up will be Dave Woolner at Willimantic, Hop Genius.
We went there. I think he had 8 beers on tap, and 6 of them were IPAs, black IPAs, Pilsner IPAs, double IPAs.
Yeah.
And this is just a little town in Connecticut. It's not. There probably isn't another brew pub around for 40 miles or something.
Wow.
There's just so much good beer out there, and we're on a mission to find it all.
Yeah,
and drink it.
Yeah, and like you say, if you go to the Great American Beer Festival, there are the brewers there that always get the attention every year after year after year, and then there are all these other booths there, these people that
are just as passionate and often just as talented.
Yeah, and then you got to think that not every brewer in the country is there. So it's a massive playground to play around in, and it's getting bigger all the time.
Yeah,
pretty soon it'll be like restaurants.
Yeah.
So I'm looking forward to that.
I think that's the hope, that every major city will have 10 or 15 brew pubs, and have 4 or 5 of them be doing interesting experimental stuff.
Well, very good. Well, guys, any last pieces of advice that you can give before we close on people who want to try either the Solera process or to jump into barrels like you guys have?
Patience. Lots of patience. What do you say, Mike?
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, it's a lot of it's almost in some ways easier than brewing regular beers. I mean, it was amazing sort of the variation we had when we were tasting the different beers going into these barrels. I mean, some people screwed up, we actually had very loose recipes. It was just sort of, mostly base malt and then add some crystal malt and then some chocolate malt or something like that. But the variation, even, we told people 25 IBUs. Some of them tasted like they had 50 IBUs. Some of them tasted like they had no IBUs. I mean, there's no way to screw these beers up as long as you give them time and you're patient, and you're willing to wait when it doesn't taste that good after 5 months or it gets sour. You're willing to wait another 8 months until it turns around.
Blending does probably cover a lot of sins, probably.
Yeah, no, it certainly covers sins, and that was actually part of the idea with giving people some freedom on the recipes. Was that it was probably a good idea for some people to use Crystal 60 and some to use Crystal 90. That's going to add complexity. That's going to, even using some people using Maris Otter and some people using Golden Promise and some people using American Two-Row for the base malt is going to add different dimensions to it. And it's going to make a beer that, part of the fun of this, that can't be recreated by yourself. I mean, it's, really a group experience and a group, effort. And to find, and this is the sort of thing, we're members of about 4 different homebrew clubs, but, if this is a thing a homebrew club wants to put together, that would be great. Or, if you can just, piece together enough friends or friends of friends, and homebrewers are always friendly enough to, chip in 5 gallons of beer to a barrel.
Well, this has been fun. And it's been fun to get back together with you, Mike. And I hope that now that you've got your own podcast. I assume you're going to be podcasting.
We're posting just sort of the audio interviews every once in a while, but it's not going to be a regular structured sort of thing. Even though I know that's exactly what we should do to build a viewer or a listenership or. Well, but Nathan and I are having fun, and it was great talking to you.
Yeah, I hope you don't get too big for your britches to come back on, Basic Brewing Radio. So,
thanks so much, James.
It's good to meet you, Nathan.
All right, take care.
Well, thanks again to Mike and Nathan. Now, there are a couple of guys pushing the envelope of home brewing, and I am glad for that. You can find their blog at brewlocal.blogspot.com, and I'll put a link to their site in the description of this episode on basicbrewingradio.com. We will be following you guys and your further adventures. If you have brewing questions, show suggestions, or just want to say howdy, write to james@basicbrewing.com, or just fill out the contact form on basicbrewing.com, and please don't forget to tell us where you're from. You can check out our home brewing DVDs, Introduction to Extract Home Brewing, Stepping into All Grain, Low-Tech Lagering and Decoction Mashing, and Introduction to Wine Kits. We've got combo deals on our site to save you a few bucks if you want to buy more than one DVD at a time. And you can see a listing of the fine folks across the country who sell our DVDs on basicbrewing.com. And if there isn't a vendor in your area, you can order them directly from us online in our online shop at basicbrewingshop.com. We have shirts on the site and some hats. Still working on a new shirt. Maybe by this time next week, we will have something to show. Thanks to everybody who's continued to click on our Amazon.com link. We appreciate the support there. Our featured products this week that were purchased through the link are Fresh Roast +8 Home Coffee Roaster with 5 pounds green coffee. Cool. And Lego Star Wars, the complete saga, plus dual illuminating motion sabers. Also cool. Thanks again, everybody. And remember, I can't tell who bought what, so no worries there. Just click on the Amazon.com logo on our site the next time you feel like Amazon shopping. And we appreciate your support, as usual. Don't forget, there are also associate links to the American Homebrewers Association and Brew Your Own magazine on our site, too. That's all until next week. Until then, thanks for listening, everybody. I'm James Spencer. Production help for Basic Brewing Radio and our website is provided by Kelly Dodson down in Austin. Basic Brewing Radio is a production of Active Voicing. We'll talk to you next time, everybody. So long.